Aloha, good evening. Well, tonight I have a very, very special guest, Lieutenant Colonel Johnnie Webb. He's the Deputy Director of Outreach and Communication, Defense POW MIA, Accounting Agency. We're talking about the 85 commingled remains of 4 Americans and 81 Republic of Vietnam servicemen crashed on December 11th, 1965 in Vietnam. Mr. Johnnie Webb is the expert. I would say he's the only one I believe would know the whole story from A to Z about these remains. Good evening.
Good evening.
Yes.
Thank you for the invitation to join you this evening.
And I'm very, very honored to have you tonight. So, when did you start working for the Central Identification Laboratory of Hawaii?
Well, I actually joined the laboratory in 1975 while it was still in Thailand. Mm-hmm. And so, in June of 1975, I joined the organization, became the operations officer, and at the time I had arrived. Shortly before that, some might remember the C-5A crash, baby lift, when they were bringing the orphans back from Vietnam back to the U.S. And so we still had the remains of those orphans as well as some of the crew members to identify when I got there in 1975. Wow. And then we worked and were able to resolve that. And in 1976, I actually moved the laboratory from Thailand here to Hawaii in March of 1976.
Wow. And as you know that, how many years that we got recover the remains from the crash site to Thailand?
So as you said, the crash was in December of 1965.
Yes.
And in June of 1974, there was an Army of Vietnam patrol that had actually located the crash site and recovered the remains at that time from the crash site. And they brought those remains back. After recovery, about a week, 10 days later, they were delivered to us. There were 17 bags of remains that were delivered to us at that time.
So it was the first time that you are connecting with the remains, right?
Yes, that was the first time we connected with the remains. And of course, they were there when I joined the organization in '75. So I knew that they were there and that we had a huge challenge on our hands to try to resolve the fate of those men.
So what did you think when you first got connection with, the remains, and you have a close relationship with those matter, right?
Well, as a Vietnam veteran myself, and knowing that these men were our allies, I felt it very important that we honor these men as we honor the Americans. These were our allies, and they need to be treated as one of us. As we fought alongside these men, they fought alongside us. And so it was very important to me to honor these men the way they should be honored.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much your effort. And along with a lot of other, like General McKay, like,
Yes.
And James Webb later, and also
Yes.
Lost Soldier Foundations. They put up a lot of effort, and yes, they actually formally honor the allies. That's so important to everybody.
Oh, yeah, yes, very important. It was clearly the right thing to do.
When was the time that is the remains of the Americans and the Republic of Vietnam servicemen segregated? Yes.
Well, that's kind of it happened over a period of time, and it didn't happen all at once. So when we got the remains and began examining the remains early on, and this was before DNA technology, so we didn't have the advantage of using DNA to try to segregate. So the only thing we could do at that time with the commingled remains was to, fortunately for I think one or two of the Americans, we had some dentition, so we had some teeth, which allowed us to make some identifications of those individuals early on. But we felt, even after that there were still some remains of the Americans that were commingled. And so it became a huge challenge now what to do if we had both American remains and South Vietnamese remains, ARVN remains, commingled. What could we do with those? And so that was a lot of discussion, a lot of trying to figure out what is our best approach.
What year and when was it completely done with the segregation?
So it was finally, and once we got to the point where we could do the DNA testing, which was in the 90s, and then I think we sampled over 150 bones for DNA testing to try to segregate the Americans from the Vietnamese. And then it wasn't until into the 2000s when we were able to make that complete segregation and identify the Americans. And so the 4 Americans that were on board, we identified the 2 pilots, one of the pilots and one of the other individuals earlier. So the 4 Americans where you had 2 pilots, a flight engineer, and a load master. And so we knew that we should have all 4, but initially we only identified 2. And then it wasn't until like 2014 that we were able to make the identification of all the Americans.
Wow, yes. Okay, I remember 2003.
Yes.
When I met you at the lab.
At the laboratory.
Yes.
Yes.
With Dr.
Dr. Tom Holland.
Tom
That's
Holland.
correct.
Yes, yes. By then, I'm asking about the commingle, and it was very touching moment to me.
I think you know that, we felt very, strongly that we should try to honor these men the best we could. And
yes.
you may recall that in the 1980s, we allowed the Vietnamese community here in Honolulu to come in with a Buddhist priest, and we actually conducted a ceremony to bless those men.
Yes.
So, I felt at that time at least we had done something to honor those men, which gave me a better feeling about where we were.
Yes, and right after I met you at the lab with Dr. Tom Holland, 2 years after that, Professor Can and I and some other Vietnamese from the overseas Vietnamese community wrote you a letter.
Very true. And so one of the things that we had considered before we had the DNA capability to really segregate the remains, we thought, well, maybe we should look at interring the remains in a national cemetery. And we looked at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific, the Punch Bowl, since we knew we had American and Vietnamese remains there, but maybe that was a possibility. That could never get worked out. And again, we had to go back to the Vietnamese government now and ask about if they would like to take the remains back.
The phrase that former Senator Johnnie Webb say, "Soldiers without the country."
Right.
So I think the 81 ARVN remains is the very significant issues that there's no relatives, no next of skins, no one to be
Right.
family members.
Right.
And how did it end up to former Senator Jim Webb?
Well, and of course, you know, being part of the government, you know, there's a lot of bureaucracy that, you know, that has to be satisfied, has to be overcome, if you will. And so there were a lot of challenges to be able to get to this point. You know, we had to work with our ambassador to Vietnam to let him know that we were going to do this, and so that he could inform, you know, the Vietnamese. We had to figure out how we were going to be able to move the remains from Hawaii to California, and so that was a huge issue to overcome. A lot of challenges with that, but we were able to finally find a way to do that, and it just took a lot of work. And then, of course, who were we going to turn the remains over to?
Yeah.
We had to have somebody to receive those remains that would be acceptable to all parties to receive those remains. And fortunately, you know, former Senator Webb stepped up and said he would take on that challenge, and I know it was a challenge for him as well. So he took on that challenge, and as a result of, you know, all the pieces finally coming together, we were able to make it happen. But it was a long, difficult challenge to get to that point.
What would happen if the remains could not be on Senator Jim Webb's hand? Then what is the solution?
That's a good question. I don't, you know, I'm not sure what the solution would be at that point. We knew we needed to do something. It just wasn't, you know, they had been in our laboratory for tens of years. It was time to properly honor them. And so if he had not stepped forward, I'm not sure what we would have done. I don't know if we could have found a place to actually, somebody to accept them, to have a burial. But fortunately, former Senator Webb was able to take on that challenge.
Right.
And
I know you got a lot of challenges, you know, for those matter. So that's why it took 33 years for the remains were in Hawaii.
Finally, as one of our allies, one of the biggest allies in the Vietnam War, these men have now been properly honored, and they have been laid to rest. I guess the most challenge, well, there's so many challenges, it's hard to pick out what the biggest challenge is. But I think the biggest challenge was to overcome whether we had the authority to provide those remains to someone other than the Vietnamese government. And so after it was finally determined that the Vietnamese government would not accept the remains back, that it would be okay. I think that was the biggest challenge. That took a lot of discussion back and forth to try to get to that agreement, and then get to the point where everybody understood that was the position, and now we need to move forward from there.
Wow. Can you share with me, is this the first time that in American history that we have the foreigners remains without, identification about who they were?
Well, we've had a few others. Again, a few years back, we recovered remains from a helicopter crew that had a South Korean captain that was flying with our crew. And fortunately, we were able to, through the South Korean government, we were able to locate his family. And when DNA became, something that we could utilize in identification, we were able to make his identification and return him back to his family in South Korea. So there are a few instances, but nothing on this magnitude, nowhere close to this magnitude.
Right. And what do you think that is the 81 orphan remains that rest in peace in the most populated overseas Vietnamese in California?
Well, I think it's the right thing to do, and let me just, talking about the 4 Americans. I tell you, when it really, I knew it all along, but it really hit me pretty hard when we had identified one of the men from that crash, one of the Americans, and his wife and daughter came out to Hawaii to receive his remains. And as I was getting ready to take them into our family viewing room so they could see their husband's father's remains, I stopped at the door and just wanted to remind them that, as we go in, his remains will be on the table, so I want to be sure you're prepared for this. And the daughter looked at me and said, "Thank you, I really appreciate that, because I need time to prepare myself to meet my dad for the first time." Wow. And so this was the first time, Mom was pregnant when Dad went off to the war in Vietnam. He didn't come back, and daughter was born. And I thought, how many of those Vietnamese, ARVN soldiers have the same type of family dynamics that those families are, who will never get to meet their father. Had an impact on me, and will remain that way for the rest of my life.
See, I mentioned earlier that your job is, to me, it's not a job. To me, it's a mission to life, because you have been through with a lot of touching moments that when they found their lost loved ones in different ways, but this is, I believe, the hardest way for them to encounter with.
Right.
And
I know, for the burial and the ceremony in California, I know within the Vietnamese community, I know that there were families that, lost, their loved ones were lost on that aircraft, on that C-123. And while they may not have the same impact that the one I just described, at least now they know that, their husband, their father, their brother now has a final resting place where they can be honored. People can come and honor them at their final resting place.
When I went to interview you on my TV back to 2003, I shared with you that all the remains belong to South Vietnamese people,
right,
not North.
Correct.
So there's no reason that we had to return these remains back to the communists. No.
Right.
These are our uncles, our fathers, our brothers, or whatever in there, and that's definitely belong to our community.
Yes.
So
in the end, I think the right decision was made, and they're in the right location.
Yeah. Right after I announced on my TV about the ceremony in Westminster on October 26th last year.
Right.
The whole bunch of Vietnamese contact me saying, "Oh, my uncle there, my auntie's husband there, my father." Before nobody said anything.
Right.
I told people there's no way that we will know who and who
right,
in the remains. So be considerate of yourself and honor them. There's nothing wrong to honor those people and look at them like our own family member.
Your own family. Yeah,
yes.
I agree.
So even I don't have any family members that belong to the 81 ARVN remains there, but we still follow the tradition that we put the white man, and
right,
that's how we traditionally way to honor those people. And all millions of Vietnamese, including overseas Vietnamese everywhere, and the Vietnamese in Vietnam, take it with appreciation and honor you guys to the rest of our life.
Well,
so
thank you.
I don't know, but I call you the guardian angel of the remains because you're the one who followed from the beginning to the end. And I would like to ask one more question. How many more American remains or missing in action is still in Vietnam that you have never covered yet?
1,587.
1,587.
Now that's the Vietnam War, so that counts those individuals lost in Laos and Cambodia.
Yeah.
There's about, in Vietnam itself, in the actual country of Vietnam, there's something over 1,200, about 1,200 in the country of Vietnam.
I have heard a lot about faking sites, faking artifacts, and so to make Americans believe that is real, with the dog tag, name tags. So I wonder if is that the government in Vietnam is really support what you guys doing, so we can bring the Americans home as soon as possible.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the Vietnamese over the years have become more cooperative and working with us, doing the work, which is really appreciated. But as in every country, there are those who see an opportunity, who try to scam families out of money. There's an individual that his photograph shows up quite often, claiming to be an American, having information that came off of a dog tag or other information, and claiming to be an American. And we see those types of scams still occurring today. Not as frequent as in years past, but within the past 6 months, we had one of those where an individual said, that individual came forward and said, "I know of a live American, we can bring him back," and it was a scam. But regardless, we check every one of those reports out. We want to be sure. And so in this case, we checked it out, and sure enough, it was a scam trying to get money. So there are those out there, but I would say overall, I think the relationship between our government and the Vietnamese government has come a long way in trying to resolve the issue of the Americans that are still unaccounted for. So. So we appreciate that cooperation.
Yes, I appreciate that too. For we live in America long enough, and this is our second country. Even this is not our native country, but more and more, we feel like Americans is with us together,
right?
Not the Vietnamese anymore. So. Personally, I want to say thank you so much for your service as the Vietnam veteran and what you have done for, Americans and the OVN. And one thing, did you see the banner?
I did see the banner. It's a beautiful banner.
This banner is, I call historical piece because it was displayed at the burial site.
Right.
You weren't there. Even, we saved the seat for you.
I know you did. I wish.
Okay. And,
sorry, I could not be there.
Yeah. So the last moment, the last phrase of the 81 OVN remains, you were not there. You with them for many years.
And the
last day you were not there. Then I look at the empty seat, and I'm still hoping you can come, so that will make a complete 100% you with them.
Yes, that would have been wonderful if I could have been there. Like I said, it's something that I've always wanted to do. I felt very strongly that these are men that fought alongside us, and so they needed to be honored, and finally they have been. It's disappointing that I couldn't be there. But I appreciate everyone sharing the photographs and the comments and the remarks that were given. it gives me, some comfort to seeing that. Even though I couldn't be there, at least I got to see, what actually occurred. And so, and it's, the job that I have, it's not just a job. It's an honor to be able to do this, to be able to provide answers to families, to give them the chance to, them as well as our nation, to honor these men, along with the ARVN soldiers, to honor them for the sacrifice that they made for the freedom that we have today. And so I could not be happier with the outcome of how it ended for those 81 ARVN remains.
And thank you so much, sir.
Thank you for joining us in this long journey to try to finally, bring it to a close honorably, something that we all appreciate. And, the Vietnamese community here in the U.S. can appreciate. I think the families that lost loved ones in that crash site, I think they feel much better. I think they know that now their loved ones have been honored. Way too long to have to wait for that. But finally, they have now been honored. They have now been recognized for their sacrifice as well.
And thank you again for your service. I accept my bow to you.
So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Giọt nước mắt tràn mi dưới vành khăn tan trắng, đôi chân em ngã quỳ bên những mảnh sương tàn. 9 năm trong rừng vắng quanh hiu núi xa xăm, 45 năm qua trên mảnh đất xứ người. Xin ơn tiếng hô phụ, khi nào em còn sống sẽ an vị các anh nơi an nghỉ cuối cùng. Các anh ơi, người lính không quê cha, hôm nay anh an vị hồn thiêng nơi vĩnh hằng. Màu bia khắc vào tim, kính cẩn em nghiêng mình khi nhịp tim còn đập, khi ơn em cúi đầu. Nay các anh an nghỉ, tuy hại ngoài xa xăm,